Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
My mom told me it was just too complicated to include me on the family cruise. She said the flights were expensive, the room was already booked, and they didn't want to stress me out by forcing me to take time off work. But what she really meant was this: it would be easier without you. I knew at the moment she said it with that fake sympathy in her voice, the kind she uses when she's telling a neighbor about their dog dying. Polite, performative, and practiced. I sat on the phone in silence while she talked about sea views and buffet dinners like I wasn't sitting alone in a one-bedroom apartment where my own brother hadn't paid rent in over 2 years. They were leaving in 4 days. And no one had even told me they were going. Let me back up. My name's Mara. I'm 32. I live in a city apartment I paid for with my own damn exhaustion, and I've been the family's emotional garbage bin since I was old enough to tie my own shoes. Evan is my older brother by 18 months, which is funny, because for most of my life, he's acted like my younger one. He got into weed early, got into harder stuff later, and somewhere in between he got into the habit of wrecking people's lives and calling it a bad patch. I've bailed him out twice. Once for a DUI and once after he forgot to pay rent and got evicted from his old place. That was when my parents begged me to take him in. Just until he gets on his feet, Mom said, like his feet weren't the problem to begin with. At first, I told myself it was temporary. Evan moved in with a suitcase and a PlayStation, and the kind of smug confidence that only someone who's been coddled his whole life can pull off without shame. He left dishes in the sink, smoked on the balcony even though I asked him not to, and filled my freezer with frozen burritos and expired beer. I came home one night after working a double shift. I'm a dental assistant, and yes, I see more molars than friends, and found him asleep on the couch with some girl who kept calling me babe and asked if we had any weed. That should have been the breaking point. But it wasn't. Because I'm the helper. Always have been. Growing up, I was the one who got forgotten at soccer practice because Evan broke his arm falling off the neighbor's shed. I was the one who didn't get a Sweet 16 party because Evan's therapy bills had drained the budget. I was the one who drove our dad to surgery while my sister, Lila, was too overwhelmed with her twin toddlers, and Evan was, apparently, still recovering from a rough few months. I remember sitting in the hospital cafeteria, sipping bad coffee while my dad was under the knife, scrolling through Facebook and seeing my entire family tagged in some brunch outing I hadn't been invited to. I didn't even react. Not even a raised eyebrow. That's the thing about being left out for so long, you stop noticing the missing pieces after a while. But the cruise? That one hit different. It wasn't just a family dinner or a forgotten text. It was a week-long vacation that they'd all planned, together for months. I found out because my sister posted a boomerang from the cruise ship deck. Champagne glass clinking. Ocean in the background. Her caption said, "Family time equals healing time." I didn't even know they'd booked it. I scrolled through the comments, half hoping someone would ask where I was. No one did. Instead, I saw smiles I hadn't seen in person in almost a year. My dad was wearing a Hawaiian shirt he swore he'd never wear. My mom had on one of those floppy beach hats that made her look like someone else's mother, someone warm, maybe even kind. Evan was there too, of course. Shirtless, grinning, holding up a drink like his liver hadn't tried to kill him 3 Christmases ago. And me? I was sitting in a living room that still smelled like his last blunt, eating leftover pad thai and wondering how the hell I got here. Oh, and get this, my birthday was 3 days after they left. Not a call. Not a card. Not even a text. I got a Facebook notification from my high school biology teacher before I heard a damn word from my own father. I sat there on my birthday night with a small cake I bought for myself and a candle I lit for no one but me. I didn't even make a wish. What's the point? Wishing assumes someone's listening. So I made a different kind of wish. Not the blow out a candle kind. The concrete kind. I stared at the lock on my front door and thought, you're the only thing separating me from peace. That night, while Evan was out, probably at the same bar where he mooches drinks off old college friends, I looked up how to legally evict someone from a shared residence. Turns out, even if they're family, even if they're squatting, there's a process. And I started it. Right there, between mouthfuls of frosting and reruns of a crime show I've seen too many times, I opened a new tab and began taking my life back. I didn't say a word to Evan. Not yet. Because some battles don't need a declaration. Some battles start in silence, with cold resolve, and a locksmith on speed dial. He doesn't know it yet. But when he comes home tomorrow, the key he's been using won't work anymore. And for once, I won't be opening the door for him. I still remember the exact day Evan moved in, not because anything dramatic happened, but because the moment he crossed the threshold of my apartment, everything started shifting without me realizing it. It was 18 months ago, give or take, on a rainy Tuesday that made the whole city feel heavier. He had one duffel bag, a broken suitcase with a missing wheel, and the same lazy smile he'd worn since high school when he got away with skipping finals because Mom said he had test anxiety. I didn't even ask for money right away, because at the time, I still thought family meant something. He promised to pay rent next month, said he just needed to stack a few checks from his landscaping gig. That gig lasted exactly 3 weeks before he got into it with the supervisor and quit. After that, the excuses came faster than the bills. I paid the electric bill because I needed lights. I paid the Wi-Fi because, ironically, I worked online part-time just to make ends meet. The groceries came out of my budget because I didn't want to argue every time the fridge was mysteriously empty after I stocked it. And Evan? He started spending his days on the couch watching old action movies, eating pizza straight from the box, and selling dime bags to kids who couldn't tell the difference between good weed and oregano. My apartment turned into a frat house for someone who hadn't been enrolled in anything since community college. I'd come home and trip over sneakers he never moved, find takeout containers sweating on the counter, and once, God help me, I stepped on a blunt roach barefoot on my bathroom tile. That was the night I almost kicked him out then and there. But almost doesn't mean much in a family like mine. We're trained to tolerate. Somewhere in the first few months, he stopped even pretending to look for jobs. He always had some new idea. He was gonna flip sneakers, start a podcast, maybe get his real estate license. Every week it was something else, and every week I got closer to drowning under the weight of his presence. I brought it up once, tentatively over dinner, some frozen ravioli I'd boiled and called a meal. I said, "Hey, when do you think you'll be able to start pitching in a little?" He looked up from his phone, deadpan, and said, "Soon, I promise. I'm just in a weird headspace right now." That was the last time I asked nicely. Then came the cruise. The smiling photos. The group chat messages I was never added to. The final straw wasn't the vacation itself, though that was salt in a wound that had never healed. It was Evan's reaction when I confronted him 2 days after they came back, bags still half unpacked in his cluttered corner of what used to be my guest room. I said, "You knew they were going. You didn't even say anything." He didn't look guilty. He just laughed, like I was some sitcom character getting worked up for nothing. He leaned back in my own recliner and said, "They didn't want drama. And you're kind of dramatic, Mara." I stood there, speechless, holding a basket of his dirty laundry I'd scooped off the floor because I couldn't stand the smell. That word, dramatic, rang in my ears like a bell. It's what Mom used to say when I cried in public. What Dad would mumble when I dared to speak up at dinner. Dramatic. Emotional. Sensitive. I was always the one making problems just by pointing out the ones that were already there. But this time, I didn't cry. I smiled. Cold and quiet. I said, "Oh, I'm dramatic? Okay, let me give you a show." The next day, I took a long lunch break and walked right into a legal aid office. I told them the situation, and they helped me draft an official eviction notice. Turns out, you can kick someone out, even family, as long as you follow the right process. I printed it, signed it, and taped it to his door like a ribbon on a gift. When Evan got home, he didn't even notice it at first. He was too busy yelling into his phone about someone owing him money for a product. When he saw the paper, his face crumpled into a mask of confusion, then amusement. He said, "What is this? You think this is gonna scare me?" I shrugged and went back to microwaving my dinner. He tore the paper down and tossed it in the trash like it was a joke. But I wasn't joking. Not this time. I gave him 30 days to leave, which is like almost 2 weeks, right? I mean, 30 days sounds like a lot, but it really isn't when you've been freeloading for 18 months and haven't even tried to get your shit together. I know that sounds petty, and maybe I got the math wrong, whatever, but I'd reached the point where I was more afraid of not doing anything than I was of rocking the boat. Evan kept laughing, telling me I was being petty, that the family would turn on me if I didn't calm down. I didn't respond. I didn't engage. I just went online and scheduled a locksmith. It was petty, maybe, but petty gets shit done when polite gets ignored. I waited until Friday night, when I knew Evan would be out at his usual bar trying to flirt with some girl who still thinks he's mysterious instead of pathetic. I had the locksmith change the front door lock and the secondary deadbolt while Evan was gone. As the man packed up his tools, I stood in the hallway, staring at the new silver lock that now felt like a final word I'd never been brave enough to say out loud. It clicked shut with a sound that felt like freedom. It was quiet, satisfying, and just loud enough to drown out every guilt-tripping voice in my head. I didn't text Evan. I didn't warn him. I didn't owe him that anymore. Tomorrow, when he tries his key and it doesn't work, maybe he'll finally realize that sometimes silence means war. And I'm finally done surrendering. He came back louder than I expected, though I probably should have known better than to imagine Evan would go quietly into any kind of night, especially not one where the world had finally turned its back on him. I was on the couch with a cup of tea when I heard the first slam, his palm or shoulder hitting the door with all the misplaced entitlement of someone who's never been told no and actually had it stick. The key rattled uselessly in the lock for a few seconds, and then came the pounding, fists now, like I'd stolen something from him, like I hadn't been the one feeding him, housing him, and scraping his existence off my peace of mind for the better part of 2 years. I sat there and didn't flinch. Let him knock. Let him scream. He started with shouting my name, like this was just some misunderstanding we could laugh about in 10 minutes. "Mara, come on, open the damn door." That was followed by more banging, something metal this time. Maybe he kicked the door with the heel of his boot or tried to pry it with a screwdriver, I don't know. Then came the curses, half at me, half at the world. "You're being a bitch," he yelled through the wood, his voice cracking not from sorrow but from disbelief that someone had finally called his bluff and didn't fold when he puffed up. He texted me 4 times in a row, the first one just a question mark, like that would somehow undo the lock. Then, "You serious right now?" Followed by, "You better open this door or we're gonna have a real problem." And finally, "Wow, after everything I've done for you." That one made me laugh, which felt dangerous and exhilarating, like laughing at a funeral because your grief finally broke through the dam and came out crooked. The neighbors started peeking out by the 5th minute. Mrs. Raymond from across the hall cracked her door, her tiny dog barking behind her legs, and she just watched with that kind of curious judgment only old women and retired school teachers can pull off. Some guy on the floor below stepped out with his laundry basket, paused, and then backed inside again. No one said a word until a young woman I barely recognized from 2 floors up passed by on the stairs, took one look at Evan kicking the door, and muttered, "About damn time," before clapping once. Just once. Loud enough to echo. I didn't open the door. I didn't reply. I didn't move. What none of them could see was the scar tissue behind that silence, the years spent being the duct tape that held my family together while they all cut me apart one paper-thin slice at a time. I remembered the day Evan got his DUI, how he called me, slurring apologies while parked sideways on a stranger's lawn, and how I dropped everything to show up at the courthouse the next morning, paid for his lawyer, and got scolded by my mother for making him feel ashamed because I didn't pretend it was just a mistake. I remembered standing in my kitchen, holding the court invoice while she told me I was being selfish for asking him to pay even part of it back. "He's still healing," she said, like Evan had a wound instead of a pattern. She always spoke about him like he was a puppy, someone abandoned on her doorstep. Meanwhile, I was the working mule she hitched her emotional burdens to and forgot to feed. And now, the puppy was scratching down my front door and crying foul that the meal ticket had finally snapped. The texts didn't stop with him. By evening, the entire family chat, which I was still miraculously included in, probably by accident, lit up like a Vegas strip. Lila started it, her messages predictably polite in that fake worried sister way she mastered after becoming a suburban mom with too many book clubs and not enough real problems. "Mara, maybe we should talk about this," she typed, followed by, "He's your brother. Don't you think this is a little much?" Then Mom joined in, leading with emotional artillery like she always did. "He's outside, Mara. On the street. He's humiliated." Then, like clockwork, "You're really going to make your own brother homeless?" And finally, the cherry on top, the guilt sundae I've been served every birthday since I turned 15, Dad's medical condition. "Your father's blood pressure is spiking. He's crying, Mara. We've never seen him this upset." I stared at the screen and let those words hover, then fade. My thumb hovered for a second, and I almost didn't reply. But I did. I said, "Maybe y'all should have thought about Dad's blood pressure before leaving your daughter behind like luggage while you sailed off to Aruba." I waited. No one replied. Not one of them. So I took a breath, opened my phone, and one by one, blocked every name. Mom, Lila, Dad, even that cousin who only texted for fantasy football updates and forgot I existed outside autumn. I blocked Evan too, even though he was still sending messages that got more unhinged by the hour. "You better not touch my stuff," he wrote, as if the couch he destroyed and the empty PlayStation box counted as assets. "You owe me," he said next. And then, "I can't believe you're doing this to me." But here's the thing no one tells you about guilt. It rots from the inside when you let it grow unchecked. It becomes a kind of mold that covers everything sweet in your life until all you taste is bitterness. And when you finally clean it out, when you finally say no and mean it, it hurts like hell. But it also smells like freedom. So I blocked them all. Sat back down. Pressed mute on the entire world. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't sound lonely. It sounded earned. It sounded like mine. It's wild how silence can feel like both a warm blanket and a pair of handcuffs, depending on which hour of the day you catch it in. The first few days after I shut them all out were glorious in a way I didn't even know I needed. No buzzing phones, no guilt-laced texts, no Evan slamming cabinet doors like that was a form of communication. I walked through my apartment in the quiet and almost didn't recognize it without his chaos clinging to the corners. But the quiet didn't stay friendly for long. By the third night, it started to press in, seeping under the door like fog, whispering in the back of my head questions I thought I'd already answered. What if they were right? What if I really had gone too far? What if I was the one who finally tipped the scale too hard, the one who cut too deep, turned cold too fast? I hadn't talked to a single blood relative in almost a week, and for a woman raised in a family where silence was considered the worst kind of war crime, that absence had started to feel less like freedom and more like exile. I found myself staring at my phone, even after blocking them, thumbing through old photos I swore I deleted. Christmases where Evan was clean and smiling, where Mom made her weird dry turkey and Dad passed me the gravy without saying a word because that was his version of affection. I remembered birthdays when Lila actually remembered to call, and I wasn't the one carrying the emotional weight of the entire family on my back like a donkey nobody ever thanked. But memory is tricky. It softens things you should never forget and polishes the edges of pain until you start thinking it was love. That night, I pulled out an old shoebox from under my bed filled with things I hadn't looked at in years, photos, ticket stubs, the kind of junk that only means something when your brain insists on nostalgia over truth. At the very bottom was a folded-up flyer from my high school prom, the one I never went to. I was supposed to go with Jonah Myers, a quiet kid from geometry class who wrote my name on his hand once and didn't care if anyone saw. I had the dress picked out. I had my nails done. I had counted the days down like it was Christmas. Then, 3 days before the dance, Evan crashed the family car on a late-night beer run, totaled it against a lamppost, and walked away without a scratch. My parents, in their usual style, circled the wagons around him like he was the one who needed comfort. I remember Mom standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, sighing like I was the inconvenience. "It's just a dance," she said. "Evan needed the car more than you needed the memory." I think something in me broke that night and never really healed. I didn't even fight back. I didn't scream or cry. I went upstairs, took off the dress I never got to wear, and hung it in my closet like a relic from a life I was never going to live. That closet, by the way, stayed closed for a year. And somehow, even now, over a decade later, that tiny moment felt bigger than I'd admitted. Not because of a missed dance, but because it was the first time I understood what it meant to be invisible in your own house. That memory sat with me long after I closed the box and shoved it back under the bed. I stood in the kitchen later, making tea I didn't really want, and I heard my therapist's voice in my head again, calm and stubborn like she always was when I tried to minimize my own pain. Boundaries are not cruelty, Mara. They're clarity. You're not hurting anyone by refusing to let them hurt you anymore. I repeated that out loud like it was scripture, like saying it would make it more real. Around midnight, I checked my Venmo out of habit. I don't even know why, maybe because it's the only place left Evan could reach me without a block in place. And there it was. A new notification. A single dollar sent from Evan's account with a message attached. "You won. Hope you are happy." It was a gut punch in 6 words, passive, sarcastic, empty in all the ways he knows how to wound without bleeding himself. I stared at that screen for hours, the digital equivalent of someone hurling a rock and hiding behind a fence. He couldn't even say it with his voice, couldn't even try to apologize. It wasn't an olive branch. It wasn't remorse. It was a breadcrumb tossed in my direction, hoping I'd come crawling for more. I didn't reply. I didn't refund the dollar. I didn't screenshot it for laughs. I just turned the phone face down and went to bed. And for the first time in almost 8 months, I slept for 10 hours straight. Number 3 a.m. spirals, no fake family emergencies, no Evan stumbling through the hallway at 2 in the morning asking if I had any ibuprofen because he was crashing hard. Just sleep. Heavy, dreamless, clean. And I would have called that a win. I was calling that a win until I opened my inbox the next morning and saw a subject line in all caps sitting at the top like a fresh bruise. Urgent. We need to talk. Dad's health is getting worse. It was from my mom. No greeting. No softening. Just another alarm bell pulled in the middle of the night like they always do when they've run out of ways to control me politely. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it, coffee in hand, heartbeats steady but shallow. Because I knew this game. I knew this fate. And I knew, deep down, that once I read that message, things would shift again, and not necessarily in my favor. I knew something was off the second I heard the muffled voices outside my door, not the usual echo of neighbors passing by or a package being dropped off, but the unmistakable tone of a family trying not to fight in public while still absolutely fighting. I didn't have to look through the peephole to guess who it was, but I did anyway, because some part of me needed to see it with my own eyes. Mom standing there in her stiff church sweater, even though it was a Tuesday. Lila with her arms crossed tight like she was holding herself together just long enough to deliver a speech she'd rehearsed in the car, and Dad a few feet behind them, rocking slightly on his heels like a man waiting in line for bad news. And there was Evan, slouched against the wall like a defeated teenager, a backpack at his feet and a look on his face that wasn't anger anymore. It was just blank, which somehow unsettled me more than if he'd come screaming. I didn't open the door. Not right away. I stood there in the hallway, hand on the knob, and listened. Mom was the first to speak, voice too loud for the space, as if by projecting enough, she could shame the door into opening. "Mara, this is getting ridiculous," she said, the kind of line that always came just before a demand wrapped in fake concern. "You're tearing this family apart, she added, like she hadn't already sliced it into pieces by pretending for decades that I was just the support beam holding up the house everyone else got to decorate. Lila chimed in next, her voice softer but sharpened with urgency. "He's living out of his car, Mara," she said, as if I didn't already know that, as if I hadn't envisioned it a dozen times since changing the locks. "You've made your point. Loud and clear. Can we please just move on from this?" Her voice cracked on the word please, and I knew what she was doing. The tears, the vulnerability. Lila was playing good cop, hoping that the memory of her little sister who used to braid her hair and sit on her bed with ice cream after fights would crawl out of me and take over. But that Mara didn't live here anymore. Still, I hesitated. Not because I wanted to open the door, but because I knew that if I did, if I so much as cracked it open an inch, I'd be sucked back into the old rhythm, where guilt was currency and I was always the one left paying the bill. But then something in me shifted, like a gear grinding back into place after years of misalignment, and I turned the knob. The door opened slow, deliberate. Every face lifted toward me like I was the judge about to hand down a verdict. Mom's lips were already parting to say something, probably another guilt grenade masked as maternal love, but I didn't let her get a word in. I looked at all of them, each one wearing that same mix of shame and disbelief that always came when I stopped playing the part they wrote for me. I said, "For 30 years, I begged for scraps of kindness. You gave me obligation. Now I'm giving you the same." And then, just like that, I shut the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I closed it with the same calm certainty I'd envied in other people my whole life, the ones who seemed to know exactly when to walk away and never look back. I locked the deadbolt, leaned my forehead against the wood for a moment, and took the deepest breath I'd taken in months. Maybe years. They didn't knock again. Not right away. I think they were too stunned. Maybe they expected me to shout or fall apart, to finally cave after they dragged the whole circus to my front step. But I didn't. I walked into my clean, quiet apartment and poured myself a glass of red wine, the good stuff I'd been saving for nothing in particular. I sat on the couch, legs tucked under me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to feel the weight of solitude without mistaking it for loneliness. I looked toward the window, the city outside humming with life that didn't revolve around me or my family or the endless chaos they dragged behind them like baggage they never had to carry themselves. I raised the glass in a small toast to no one in particular and said aloud to the empty room, "I didn't burn the bridge. I just finally noticed I was the only one walking on it." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was earned. It filled the room like light, clean and unburdened. I sat there for a long time, letting it soak into me, letting the stillness rebuild something they had chipped away piece by piece over the years. And then my laptop pinged. I almost didn't check. I almost let it sit unopened, but the subject line caught my eye, plain and fragile, from Evan. I clicked. The message was short, but not flippant. There were no jokes, no sarcasm, no demands or manipulations. Just raw words, the kind you write when you've run out of performances. "I don't know who I am without you. I don't know where I'm supposed to go. I'm not angry. I'm scared." That was it. No apology. No request. Just fear laid bare. I sat there, blinking at the screen, fingers hovering over the keys, unsure whether I was supposed to feel vindicated or shattered. Because for all the damage he'd done, for all the nights I stayed up wondering why I was never worth defending, here was the one message that didn't try to shift the blame. It just existed. I didn't reply. Not right away. And maybe I never will. Or maybe I will tomorrow. The screen faded to black, and I sat still, not searching for an ending. Because maybe this isn't one. Maybe this is just where the noise finally stopped.